Hello and welcome to the CameraTron9000 feature overview. In this video I'll be going over most of the features in the CameraTron9000 Unity Asset, which can be found on the Unity Asset Store. This video will be broken up into sections, and each section has a timestamp link in the description down below, and you can just skip ahead to the section you want to see with that. The first two sections will cover the two main components in this asset, the surface controller script and the camera object script. These two sections will likely be longer than the other two sections. The third section will cover the selection framework, which includes the selection tool script, the click select script, and the rectangle select script. The fourth section will cover the focus tool script, and the fifth and final section will cover the interaction coroutines framework, which is a pretty big time saver when implementing interactive coroutines, with user input and whatnot. And in the fifth section, I'll also go over any miscellaneous stuff I might have missed and just other stuff worth mentioning. And if you'll just please forgive me, I'm a little sick right now, but the video's got to get done right now. So anyway, let's move on. All right, let's hop into section 1. All right, this is section 1, and we're covering the surface controller. Let's just take a moment right now and just kind of talk about the little structure over here. This is the way I have it set up. I have an empty object I just call CameraTron9000, at position 000 scale 1, and then I have other stuff childed to it. So, it'll move around as normal, but this just stays at 000. The CameraTron9000 surface controller has the CameraTron9000 camera childed to it, and that's for rotation. And that'll make more sense later. So the surface controller is where a lot of the settings you're going to be tweaking will be, here and the camera. But first we're just going to cover the surface controller. And as you can see, it has a render for the mesh. Doesn't need to be on. I'm just going to keep it on just so you can kind of get a good idea of where it is in the video. And it also has a point light childed to it. That's just for the demo. It doesn't need to be there. It's just there for the demo. So we're going to first cover the speed settings. We're just going to go through these drop down menus one at a time. And most of these right here make sense. They're mostly common sense. And hold on, there we go. And each one has a tooltip. Every variable, as far as I know, unless I missed one, has a tooltip. And if you ever have any questions or you're confused about what a variable does, just hover your mouse over it and read the tooltip, and that should answer almost every, 99% of the time it should answer every question that you have. So, most of these right here are common sense, but this one right here might not be. So this camera speed multiplier, basically on how far away the camera, which is childed to the surface controller, as you can see it's up here, how far away it is from the surface controller, you might want to increase speed. I mean, you could always set it to none as well, but zoom normalized time is based on the zoom animation curve, which we'll get to in the next section. So based, on how far along in the zoom animation curve you are, speed up by this many units, or multiply it by this many. And you're only going to see the variables that are relevant to you. So if I switch this right here to distance from controller, you're going to see that switches. So, and it's got its own tooltip as well. So, I tried to make everything as intuitive as possible, so, but if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to the support email at strategytron@gmail.com. So, alright, now let's move on to the next one. next up is mouse pan settings. And this will deal with mouse movement controls. Right now, we'll just skip down here real quick just to mention this. The mouse pan button right now is set for mouse 2. That's the middle mouse button, the scroll wheel. So if you push in on the scroll wheel. So that's how those are being initiated. So we have two different main types of mouse panning. That's left, right. So if you're holding the mouse pan button and you're moving your mouse left to right, and then if you're holding the mouse button and you're moving your mouse front to back. So first we have mouse pan settings on or off. So if it's off, it's not gonna get in your way and be intrusive. So we can do reverse front back mouse pan setting direction. I typically keep that on. I like to have my pitch reversed. That's just how I'm used to things, but if you don't want that, you don't have to have it. So for these two right here, for left, right pan mode, you can have movement or rotation. I'd say rotation is probably going to be the one that players are going to be most familiar with, doing left, right with. For front back, you can do for movement or for x-axis tilting. And as you see, if you have movement, you don't see those x-axis tilting variables down there. So you can also put a tilt limit, and instead of just doing a general degree tilt limit, I felt like it was just better to do like a tilt up or a tilt down. So that would be starting at 0 degrees on the X and then tilting up or tilting down. So, and that can kind of be better for, like let's say you have like water and whatnot, just help to fine tune the camera for your needs. So let's give an example of both of these set to movement right now. So let's go ahead and unpause. So holding the middle mouse button, moving front to back and left to right, we're getting movement. And again, relevant mouse pan speed over here. So, and oh yeah, again, as you can see, there's no x-axis tilting, but we can go over here, bam, turn it on, it's there. So you don't have to bother with you don't have to look at the variables and be like, which ones are relevant. So now, well, we just switched it to x-axis tilting. Let's test that out. So as you can see, that's with the middle mouse button, but that usually doesn't pair well with movement. There's certain settings that just pair well better. I mean, if you got a creative way in your game, maybe this particular movement works, and you can use the keyboard as well to move around. So who knows? I want to make sure you have the tools to be creative, and this asset doesn't limit you in any way. So let's go ahead and put on rotation though. And this tends to feel better. So this is all just holding the middle mouse button, not touching any other key or button. So I can rotate, in any degree around. And can go ahead and, let's go ahead and put this down like that. And we could put this at 40 degrees or 38.7, that's fine. And you could see how it limits the rotation. So, that's pretty nifty. Alright, edge panning is up next. So let's go ahead and close these right here and open it up. Now I keep it off by default most of the time if I'm going back and forth here. So it just makes sense to keep it off most of the time. But when your game's running, you want it on, or when you're testing it out. So let's go ahead and turn it on, and unpause and click in, and this will kind of give a quick idea. So edge panning is movement or some other stuff as well. We'll show. And also covers diagonals. So it's whenever the mouse is close to the edge of the screen, it starts to move or do its thing. So you can adjust the percentage of the screen that is used for that edge panning. So let's go ahead and set the left side for 45% of the edge of the screen. So as the mouse gets closer, it starts to move, but not so much over here. So you can adjust it differently, usually based on, if you have a UI bar. Let's go ahead and set that one back to 10. Like if you have a big UI bar, you might not want edge panning to, take place at a certain spot. You might want to take place closer to the edge of the UI, or, maybe right at the edge, whatever you want. So there's also edge panning gradient that's in this asset, and that increases the movement speed the closer the mouse gets. Oh, let's click in first. And so it moves you closer and closer to what you set as your edge pan movement speed. So ours is at 100. So there's also an edge pan gradient visualizer made for this asset to help, so you don't have to keep adjusting values and then testing it. So let's go ahead and turn that on real quick. So each one's at 10% right now. So let's see. So if we set that at 25%, you can see how it gets bigger. So as the mouse gets closer to it, we get closer and closer to going 100 for our speed that we have set. So that can work for all of these. So let's say for the bottom, let's set that one back to 10. Let's say we have a kind of a big UI bar, and we want it to kind of start right before our UI bar. Then, this visualizer really helps save some time, whenever you're doing your design. So let's put that back at 10. Now, this right here, this variable is something I want to talk about real quick. Let's go ahead and pause him so we can get our tooltip. If you want to just pause the video and read that real quick. Anyway, I'll just start talking about it now. So, as you could see, we don't have a perfect square for our window, but we want kind of a similar experience in terms of like distance from, the edge of the screen. So, let's say let's do more like this. Let's put it like this, and let's move that back out. Let's unpause, click in. So right now I have it set to use minimum ratio side. So whichever side's the smallest. So right now our vertical side's the smallest. So if we set this to none, you can see that there's a big difference. So 10% of the left and right side of the screen, this is what it is. But 10% of this side of the screen is, a lot smaller. So, that's not a particularly consistent user experience. So in order to, give you that, you can either set it to the maximum, which will make all of these align to the biggest one right here. So that's the left and right, or the minimum. I typically go for the minimum. That's just me, but, you pick whatever option you want for your game. So that's just a really nice thing, and I developed this whole tool, and then I realized that towards the end I was like, I need to fix this. I need to make a tool for this. So this is that. It's just one of those things you typically don't think of, but it's kind of important. So hard edge panning is basically when the mouse is over, on the edges. So if you move your mouse right here and you keep going, and now it's over, as you can see, and it's still going. So this works, no matter what your window size is. So I definitely suggest keeping that off while you're, working in the editor, because it can get very annoying. But whenever your game is, finished, and, you make your build and you're running it and, launching it through Steam or whatever, then that's how you probably want to keep that on. But all these options, you can, inside your game, you can tick on and off. Like if let's say you click a UI button and you open up your map, maybe you want to turn the edge panning off. And we'll also get to this a little later, but we'll just kind of cover a little bit right now. There's a script for putting on UI elements, like a button right there. As you can see, these buttons up here. And they can be easily configured to allow or disallow certain types of movement or motion or whatnot. So right now, that if I go over, that allows edge panning, but right now, let's go ahead and, or hard edge panning, sorry. Let's go ahead and turn that off. So we're edge panning right now. When our mouse is over that, we're not, but as soon as we take it off, we are. So if I'm also rotating right now, if I'm already rotating, it keeps going. But if my mouse is over it and I hit the middle mouse button, as we showed in the last section for mouse panning, I can't do it unless my mouse goes over it. So it's very configurable. So just to make life a lot easier on you. All right, so that's it for edge panning. We'll move on to the next one. All right, now let's look at rotation smoothing. So this is one that it's one of those features I didn't realize that I needed until I had made most of this. Kind of like the screen edge ratio adjustment we talked about in the last section, but it's very important. So we'll give a good example of it right now. It's easier to see it. So let's take our camera and let's set our distance to, I don't know, 800. That sounds good. So keep an eye on the mountains in the background and just a little bit of everything. So well, let's move back to it. Okay, so right now let's turn it off. So we're gonna do some rotation, and you'll notice it's a little jumpy. That's because rotation of this camera object, let's go ahead and show it so it just makes more sense with a visual example. So this is our surface controller right here, and this is our camera way over here. And so the further the camera is away from the surface controller, if the surface controller rotates, spins on its y-axis 1 degree, the further the camera is away, the further distance the camera is going to move. So if you're close up, it's not going to move much if you just rotate 1 degree, but if it's further away, it's going to rotate a lot. So you'll get a little bit of a jumpy visual, stuttery look, and that's, not visually appealing. So that's what rotation smoothing does. It fixes this. So let's go ahead and show this. You'll see it can be a little stuttery, a little jumpy, but with rotation smoothing, it's much smoother. So what rotation smoothing does is it rotates still to the target direction based on the input. So the user still ends up going where you would expect to go, the amount of, units. But it does it over a period of time or a period of frames. And you can set a maximum number of extra frames that the rotation takes place. And this right here, the tooltip helps to explain this one pretty good. But for every this number of units the camera is away from the surface controller, that's how many, or then add an extra frame, or then for the rotation, and then after that first initial rotation, let's say we're, with this example, this is set to 100 and we're 800 units away, then we use 8 additional frames. But for each additional update frame where let's say the rotate key or button is still being pressed, you just add 1 additional frame. You don't add another 8 frames, or else it'll just get out of hand. You just add 1, and then you get a pretty good smoothing effect that's not like, you don't get a feeling of lag. So as you can see, this is a pretty good example. 800, I have it capped right now at 3, but let's go ahead and set it to 8. That's fine too. And you'll notice a pretty big difference. The difference gets a little more intense. Let's turn edge panning off. Good example of how it can get in the way sometimes. So the bigger the screen is, the more noticeable it is. So if we turn it off and let's put the camera at 1,000 even. So let's rotate that. Can kind of see how it gets a little jumpy. And then we go back here and turn it on, and it's much smoother. So, alright, that's rotation smoothing. Alright, next up is boundary settings. So let's go ahead and open that. Alright, so in this asset, there's a way to set up boundaries so the camera and surface controller don't go over the edges of your terrain. Now, it does have built-in checking for terrain neighbors, but if you've ever laid down terrain and then adjusted it later, or put, oh, I'm going to duplicate it and then, delete that one and put something in there, often neighboring terrains can get deleted, and it happens sometimes. So there's a script I made. You just drop it onto your terrain object and you just tell it if it has a right boundary, bottom boundary, top boundary, left boundary. So instead of just using neighbors. But let's say you're doing procedural generation, you could use neighbors, but you could also just attach this into your procedurally generated terrain. But this is a good time to show. So we have a pretty big terrain here. I wanted a bunch of cliffs and whatnot. I wanted a good obstacle course for the camera while I was testing it to make sure it met high qualities of standards. So we have 4 here. And let's see, I guess we didn't turn that one on. So let's go ahead and turn that one. That one's a right and a top. So those are the boundaries, and let's go back to here. So we can do a boundary check with the camera. I'd probably suggest the camera most of the time, but just depending on how you have the camera configured, it might be more, preferential to set it to surface controller. So, but we'll go ahead and give a good example of the boundary settings right now. So let's go ahead and move over here to the terrain edge, and right now we have boundary percentage offset from the edge of 50%. That's probably a bit much, so let's go ahead and set that to 20 and give this a shot. So once we're about 20% away from the edge, we can't really move any further. So the surface controller is past 20% because we have it set with camera, but if we set it to the surface controller, it's going to be different. So surface controller now is at that edge. So one thing that just kind of feels good with the camera is, like, let's say you get to the edge and then you're like, okay, I can't keep going, and you want to rotate around. It gives you kind of a good smooth rotation back into, the rest of the terrain where you can move. So that's just a simple rotation. I'll even hold down the rotate key instead of use the mouse, and that's how it rotates you back in. So it's a really good natural feel for, once you get to a boundary, putting you back. So yeah, this note right here tells you what I already told you about the terrain boundary script. So that pretty much covers boundary settings, and now we're going to get to height and terrain settings, one that's pretty fun and interesting, and probably very important to most of you. So that one will be a good one to listen to. Alright, so let's get to the height settings. Okay, so if you've ever looked at other camera assets out there, whether they're for Unity or Unreal, or you ever tried to make an asset yourself for cameras, you know that adjusting the height is a pretty tricky thing, and making a camera that adjusts height in a smooth feeling way across a variety of terrains or all terrains is pretty challenging. So, and also dealing with terrain clipping and all the many fun problems that come along with adjusting height. you'll know that it can be challenging. So this asset covers every base that I could possibly imagine. So let's go ahead and just start from the top. Height limit mode is you can either set for minimum, maximum, or both, or none. So this basically is a good thing. Let's say you have water. Let's say you had a water line right here, and you didn't want the camera to go underneath the water. So then you would just set the minimum height for that. Or let's say you had mountains, but you didn't want them to go up the mountain a certain height. And let's say your mountain was 1,500 feet was its peak. So if you set it to 1,000, then the highest height you could really go would be 1,000. So, or if you had airplanes going in the sky, or whatever kind of creative things you might have going on for your game. So that's there to help for limiting that. And then let's go ahead and just set that to none real quick. So height adjustment mostly takes place with terrain, but it can also take place with mesh colliders. So you can turn that on or off if you want. And so these guys right here they do have the script attached to them. And let's go ahead and show that script real quick. That would be this script. Or we could just go into scene, pause, and we can go ahead and click one of them and show it. So they're also selectable. We'll get to that later. And focusable. But they have this script attached to it, and it doesn't need anything other than the cam shared variables object attached to it. It doesn't need that. Like if you have a prefab, you can't really put that on there. So it does have a different way of checking. It can actually get this script by looking for the tag, and this tag is set for CameraTron9000 camera surface controller. So very unlikely that you'll have a tag with that same name. So for your surface controller that you put in, just give it that tag. There should be a prefab that comes with the asset, and I'm pretty sure it maintains the tag if you import it. I'm not 100% sure about that, but if it doesn't, go ahead and put that on there. And the other one, while we're covering this, is selection tool. That one absolutely does need the tag as well. So those are the two that absolutely need it. The other ones have there's only one that doesn't have the tag, and that's the main camera for obvious reasons. But the other ones have tags as well. They're not absolutely necessary, but they can make your life easier if you're, coding and you want to reference things in the scripts and whatnot. But anyway, let's get back to height settings. So okay, so where do we leave off? Right here. Okay, so height adjust by collider. So I know some of you out there might not want to use terrains for your game, and I wanted to make this asset as versatile as possible. That was important to me. So let's go ahead and get our zoom down to a smaller interval. There we go. That's a better interval. So we're looking at that right there, and click back into game mode. So these meshes right here can be height adjusted, same as the terrain. And as you can see, there we go. There we go. Got to get right inside it. It does check if you're actually in it, not just near it. So there we go. And it does go to the highest one. That is, it basically checks, if you want to look at it just straight down, the X and Z. If it's within that, then it'll adjust by the height. And this variable right here is important for performance. So in order to make sure everything's always consistent, there is a check done for each object that has that script attached to it. But it doesn't need to happen every update frame, because that can be just like unnecessary. So you can, it runs in a coroutine, and you can check the, let's say right now we're checking only 1,000 objects per update. So let's say you're running 60 frames a second, and you have 60,000 objects, which is highly unlikely, but let's say you do. This will maintain good, smooth performance. So let's go ahead and drop down our stats thing. So for the demo, to demonstrate the performance with this, to show that it doesn't give a bad hit and still gives you this capability, we have right here, I think it's number 4. Yeah. So this one has its mesh render off, because we don't want more tries and verts on the screen affecting our test for frame rate. So we just want to test the height adjust and capsule collider. So let's go ahead and demonstrate what the mesh would look like real quick. So that's what the mesh would look like. It would look like one of these little guys right here, but a lot bigger. So oh, it's not letting me drag one on. That's odd. Oh, there we go. So that's about how big it is, just to give you an example, because we're going to be showing that it does adjust for height. So that's kind of important to see. And let's go ahead and remove that for now and go back to game mode. And I have a separate little script. Doesn't come with the asset, but just for demoing, and it will generate 1,000 units within this box, varying heights. So that's one of the smaller ones. We're going for this one. So let's go ahead and clear all those out and pause that and go ahead and set that one's render back to off. So, okay, here we go. So pay attention to the frame rate over here. So we're, give it a few seconds. Yeah, we're about average of 100-ish. So let's go ahead and put, let's see, 10,000 in there. So we have 10,000. So our height is being adjusted by them, but only 1,000 of them are iterated per frame, and there are many optimizations built into this, like doing vector 3 distance checks before it checks for the scales and sizes and whatnot, and it'll skip ones if it doesn't need to iterate through them. There were a lot of optimizations built into this in order to keep it performance friendly, but also versatile for whatever kind of game you could possibly be making. So as you can see, it's pretty much no impact. So I'd say that's a win. So anyway, let's clear those off and move on to the next one. Oh, it's been destroyed. Oh yeah, okay. So let's go ahead and try that again, just to make sure. I think pulling that in and changing its render while the game was running probably was a bad idea. But let's go ahead and try that again, just to make sure. Yep, they are indeed in there, and they have their script, just so we can prove it, so nobody thinks it's being cheesed. So there it is, and still good performance, and they're all right in there. So there we go. Okay, proof. All right, let's get rid of those and back. Okay, So the height adjustment works for both terrain and for objects. And a question some of you might have is when using multiple terrains as we are. So let's see, our terrain line right here to the next terrain is right there. So it samples the height on a terrain, but there's a lot of calculations going on for determining of what's the current terrain. So we can check for the current active terrain is under either the surface controller or the camera. I find that the midpoint is usually more preferable, but depending on what your zoom animation curve is, and again we'll get to that in the next section, you might want it to be on surface controller or on camera. I mean, it really depends, and the options are there for you for whatever kind of creative way you want to come up with. So, and along the same lines, you can height check with the surface controller or the camera. I find if you have a zoom animation curve, I'll mention this in the next section as well, but if you have a zoom animation curve, usually you want to try and keep this surface controller in the center of the screen. And usually, you know, setting the height check with surface controller is probably going to give you a better result. However, there are some situations like let's say you're using the vertical height adjust, let's see, or the vertical zoom animation curve. We'll get to this later, but that sometimes can go better with the camera depending on, you know, how you have other settings set up. So usually surface controller is going to be your best bet there. Now this is where some of the trickier stuff gets in. So max height adjust limit is basically the max. Well, let's go ahead and hover the tooltip over, and you can pause the video if you want to read that real quick. So, okay, hopefully you read that by now. And we'll go ahead and do that one as well, and that one. Okay, and we'll do that one too. Okay, so there are a few different ways of going about this. I have it set to dynamic right now. You can have it set to fixed. And as you can see, it changes these guys down there. And let's go ahead and set it to fixed real quick. You'll see that kind of makes it a little more bumpy over this kind of terrain. You can tell it's a little more bumpy. And you can actually change this. Let's see real quick. I think setting this to maybe 125 might work. So that makes it less bumpy. But you can get a little bit different of effect. Let's say you're going from this canyon over to this canyon. See how it was basically just hovered over? You know, that might not be the desired effect. I found dynamic works for me in the kind of game I'm, you know, trying to design. But it really depends on your game. Fixed might work perfect. Dynamic will work across more variety of terrain. And you can dynamic height adjust percentage and dynamic height diff required are the variables for adjusting. Hold on one second, let me pause that real quick. So that's how many units it can move up or down in a given frame. Same with fixed. Like this is the max amount that it can move per frame. So camera height offset is just usually it's best to keep it at least above 1, if not 3. And that's for terrain clipping. We'll get to that in a second. But for the max unit difference, dynamic is probably going to work for most of you most of the time. And that's what gives you this kind of, like, you know, drop down and coming across. And let's go ahead and show the drop down for fixed. So let's say we'll get both the camera and the height controller. You see how slow that is? Not the best. But if you don't have like vast open cliffs and you have a lot of bumpy terrain like this, and your map's mostly flat, sometimes, you know, with fixed and then setting this to a certain number will give you just a, you know, pretty good effect, sometimes better than fixed or dynamic. So it's really just up to you. As I said, I'm still sick right now and I had a little bit of a coughing fit. Okay, so sorry about that fade back in. Let's see, where did we leave off? Dynamic diff required, so and height adjust percentage. Let's pause this. Okay, yeah, that's right. And we already allowed you to read these. If you pause the video. So let's get on to terrain clipping, which is kind of a tricky problem. With terrain clipping, you can either really have smooth height adjustment movements and a little bit of terrain clipping, or a lot, depending on how you make it, or no terrain clipping and it can be a little bit jarring of a movement. So as you could see with this, you could see the surface controllers under the terrain. So again, another reason I typically suggest height check with the surface controller. But usually you don't want the camera to clip into the terrain. That's for most games, if you can avoid it, then you will. But it's a tricky thing to have smooth cameras but not clip into the terrain. So for this asset, there's 4 options. There's reduced dynamic, excuse me, reduced fixed, not allowed, and allowed. So reduced dynamic and reduced fixed are both pretty good options. I like reduced dynamic. Maybe I just like the word dynamic personally. I don't know. They're both pretty good options. So with reduced dynamic, let's go ahead and read the tooltip for that one as well. So if you want to pause the video real quick and read that, and also this one. And we'll go ahead and do that so you can read this one's tooltip. Not allowed has a little note, and allowed doesn't have anything. So back to reduced dynamic. So reduced dynamic kind of does a thing with a factor, and it's I don't know, personally I think it's typically a better option, but if you can see, you'll still get a little bit of clipping, as you can see on the left side of the screen around here. If I rotate fast into this whatever you call this large hill, very steep hill, you'll get a little bit of clipping, but you'll quickly get out of the clipping, and you'll still get very smooth movement. So let's get, and this is set to 12, and let's go ahead and talk about that one real quick. Oh, we gotta pause. Sorry. And so yeah, it moves the surface controller this % closer towards the desired height each update frame, and that's to just kind of, you know, reduce jarring movements. I have it set to 12. 12 works for this terrain. You're probably going to want to set it to a number that works for your terrain. Let's see. I don't think there's a number that tells me what the min and max height of my terrain is, but it's a good amount. It's a good amount. So it's a pretty large canyon. So 12 works pretty good for this terrain, but you can just adjust it. Let's say you have multiple maps, you can just have a little attribute for each map. That's just like what's its preferred reduced dynamic smooth factor. But to be honest, like moving it you know, if you just have it set for 10, let's say, for all your maps for your game, it'll probably work just about the same. And if that's easier for you, that will work. Anyway, let's get back in. So let's show reduced fixed. Okay. So, might need to update that tooltip to be more descriptive. So, I believe this moves it this many units, if I remember correctly, instead of a percentage closer. I'll update that tooltip before I upload the asset. But, so it moves it this many units closer. That can sometimes be better because it gives you a consistent movement each update frame, just 3 units up, as opposed to a percentage, which is a little bit different. Sometimes the percentage can be smoother, like on this terrain it works much better, but it just really depends on your terrain. That's like, again, I said earlier, if your terrain's really bumpy but mostly flat, then it might work better with fixed. So it's really just, you know, what works for you. But as you can see with fixed, you know, setting it to 3, it takes a little longer to get through that. If I set it to, let's say, I don't know, 15, it goes up faster, but it can be a little more jarring, a little less smooth. And let's go ahead and test dynamic again in the same spot. So that's dynamic. It moves up faster, yes, than reduced fixed when it was set at 3 or 15, I believe. However, it doesn't move the same amount each update frame, so it gives more of a smooth transition, smooth in, smooth out kind of thing. So it can just feel better sometimes, even though it's a little faster. And that's why I like it more, is because it's fast. It gets you out from underneath the terrain quickly, but still feels smooth. So let's go ahead and show not allowed and show how jarring that can be. So that can be jarring. Let's show it down here. This will give an even more extreme example. So let's set our rotate speed a little higher, because I'm going kind of slow right now. Set that keyboard, and let's use the keyboard instead of the mouse. So that can be a little more jarring. And then let's set, it's down here, reduce dynamic. So yeah, you're getting a little more clipping, it's true, but it's a little slower. Some of you game designers are just going to say, no way, no terrain clipping, I hate terrain clipping, I can't stand it. Alright, well then set it to not allowed. Yeah, we got an option for you, no matter what your preference is, for virtually everything. This asset tries to cover every base and every idea for any kind of camera and camera configuration you could possibly want for, you know, a strategy type game, or even an RPG game where you're following somebody around like Diablo. It can even work for that. So let's go ahead and set it to allowed. So yeah, that's probably not what you want, you know, usually. And so right now we're height checking with the surface controller. So if we set it to camera and we set it to allowed, it'll get there eventually, you know. So allowed's usually not preferred, but I mean, it really depends on the game you're designing. Allowed might work perfectly for something you're trying to do. So oh, and one more thing, almost forgot. So there's also some extra methods in various scripts. There's more info on that in the documentation, which can be found here. One of those would be this go up and go down a level, which it's in the camera surface controller, go up or down one level with an intuitive name. And that allows you to go up or down one level, and you can have it only render the terrain that is for the asset that you want, or the terrain that you're currently on. So now, as you can see, that one disables the rendering for the terrain above it. So it's pretty nifty and saves on performance for situations like where you want to make an underground level part of your game. So it's just quick and easy, and just something nifty. Not super amazing, but it's there. So alright, and that's it for height settings. Alright, and the last thing for the CameraTron9000 Surface Controller, and thank you for sticking with this video for so long. I know it's a lot of information, but I figure, if you're gonna pay for the asset, you'd want to know all that it can do, and you'd want to be able to see it. And because pictures don't just show what this kind of asset can do. You need to see visibly in motion. So over here we just got one last thing. We're just gonna go over the input settings. So we got mouse pan key, use keyboard controls. Again, you only see what's relevant, and you have the left key / button. These all use the Unity key codes. So key codes cover mouse buttons as well, not just keyboard controls. So and then relevant things like mouse panning deals with the mouse motion and the units that the number that gives, and creates movement numbers and multipliers based on that and whatnot. So these are all the relevant key code stuff for and all the movements and rotations and whatnot for this script. So alright, that's it for the Surface Controller. Next up is the camera. Alright. Alright, now we're gonna cover section 2, which is the camera zoom and swivel script. The zoom in this asset takes place with a zoom animation, and that's just to make it so much easier to make your own custom animation for zooming. It comes with 3 pre-configured zoom animation curves and 5 custom ones that you can make yourself. These 3 variables are pretty self-explanatory. Do you want to use zoom with the wheel, and then which keys do you want to use for zooming? Let's take a look at the 3 different clips, and then we'll talk some more about the animations. So alright, so we have it set to the zoom curve default. Now each animation clip pairs well with certain other settings. So the one we're looking at right now, the zoom curve default, does not pair well with x-axis tilting, which is what you've been seeing so far in the video. So let's set that to movement. And so let's start out here, and so we'll zoom out, and that's pretty much how that zoom animation curve goes. Now, a tip for making your own zoom animation curve is try to keep the Surface Controller in the center of the screen. That just tends to give the best, look and feel. So let's take a look at the other ones. So you've already seen horizontal zoom, which pairs well with x-axis tilting. Oh yeah, whenever you change a clip, and then you zoom, it just puts you at 0 at the closest. So so that's the horizontal zoom. It doesn't matter where it is, it goes back and forth. So it just works. So alright, so we have vertical zoom, so let's start that one out. So this one could probably stand to be a little further away from the Surface Controller, but this is just where it is right now. And the reason I would say it could stand to be a little further away is to just make use of over here on the Surface Controller script in height settings, to make better use of the current active terrain under midpoint. So just a personal preference. So vertical zoom has a setting it pairs well with as well, which is it does not pair well with x-axis tilting. So let's set that back to 0. And so it pairs well with a setting over here in the swivel. It's called swivel mode, or XY swivel settings. So excuse me. So swivel mode allows the camera to rotate on its own axis, or on its own local axis for the X and Y axis, not Z. It tries to lock the Z axis. So just so we can use the X-axis and Y-axis swivel limits a little better. So you can reverse the pitch. Well, let's go ahead and demonstrate that real quick. You can use 2 keys. I have it set with mouse 2 and left control right now, and so it works like this. And when I release the keys, it returns back to where it was, because that's how the swivel return mode is set right now. You can set this to none, and this is set to use mouse 2, but if we look over here, our mouse panning button is also mouse 2, so it has built-in compatibility with that, so it makes sure it doesn't also start to do mouse panning. So right now we're just using mouse 2, so that's pretty neat. And these are the speeds for swivel mode and the swivel return mode. And right here is a different type of return mode, so I can just hit the button and release it, and just be able to swivel all the way around and do its thing. And then whenever I zoom in or out, that sends me back. I can do it for the hit keys again, and it says keys, but I mean it could be mouse button. It's just it uses Unity key codes, which key codes include keys and mouse buttons. So this one's return mode is hit the keys again. So again, I hit it, released, and then whenever I hit it again, sends me back. So now, to get back to where I was saying with the vertical zoom animation clip, tends to pair well with none. So this has built-in checks to make sure it doesn't, mess with the rotations and whatnot when released. So just to make sure it was compatible with the zoom animation clips, just because I really wanted those to be the primary way to make a zoom curve, because it's just so much easier. So this one, while I hit the button, I'm rotating around or swiveling around, and then when I release it, it just stops. And I can zoom up or down, move all around and do whatnot, and it stays in place. So that's a pretty good pairing for that one. And you can also do swivel axis limits. So we just set that one to 32, so that's as far down as it's let me go, and then as far up as it's let me go. And right now Y swivel is 180. You'll probably want to leave it at 180, but let's go ahead and test it without 180. So let's put it at 81. So there we go, it's limiting us right now. So now let's get to this over here. Let's go ahead and drop that down. Well, let's put that back at release keys and horizontal zoom, and put this back at x-axis tilting, and do our zoom. Okay. Let's see. We'll put this back. We'll just put that on another key so I don't mess with mouse panning. Comma. There we go. So there we go. So zoom to cursor settings, it's a pretty common thing in a lot of games. So let's go ahead and turn that on. So wherever the cursor is, you'll be able to zoom to it. And this is going to be, you're going to want to configure the zoom to cursor cutoff time. That's going to be completely dependent on how you set up your zoom animation clip. So right now we have this one set to 20, so our mouse cursor's over here. So let's go ahead and test that out. So that didn't quite make it all the way, so let's go ahead and put that at 10, and let's go back to just about where we were before, and let's try that. Well, that was a lot closer. So if I remember correctly, this one works pretty good at around 5, or let's say 4.8. That's fine. So we'll go here, and that pretty much got you right where you wanted to be, just a few meters away. So let's try it a little smaller just to give a better example. Oop, let's click back in. There you go. So 2.8 got you just about exactly where you were. And the reason we have the cutoff time, let's go ahead and give an example of that. So if we don't have well, actually, that won't demonstrate it, but I'll just verbally tell you. If you don't have the cutoff time, you could be zooming and moving, and depending on how your zoom animation curve is, works, how far away you are from the controller, which, the asset can't predict, you could be moving so much to the point to where the mouse kind of goes off the screen over here, and then you're not really able to zoom anymore. So it's just a way to make sure the zoom to cursor is consistent and works pretty much no matter how you configure your zoom animation curve. So it's just nice to have. So let's see. Let's have a word about the zoom animation curves. So let's just take a look at it real quick. This is the zoom curve default. That's how that one works. And these are the positions and rotations that one messes with. This is the vertical. Take a look at that. And this is the horizontal. Take a look at that. One thing to note that you're going to want to not mess with the Z rotation. 99.9% of you probably would never want to do that because it's not, a particularly good, look and feel and user experience for your, zoom animation curve to be, twisting on the Z axis. So, that shouldn't be a problem with 99.9% of you. But it's just to help with the X and Y axis swivel rotation limits. And I'm pretty sure that pretty much covers everything. So, all right, that's it for section 2. Alright, we're going to do section 3 now, which is the selection framework, and let's go ahead and start with the selectable script for this one. Now it doesn't need to have cam shared variables object on there, and if it's a prefab it can't, but cam shared variables is going to need to have the tag, have its tag, which is this, and also the selection tool will need to have its tag as well. The other ones do have tags, but they're just there for convenience and consistency, except for the camera obviously has to have the main camera tag. Alright, back to the selectable script. Alright, so selection priority, the lower the number, the higher the priority. This is used in rectangle select. But you can also use it for other things and purposes if you find it. There's also is rectangle selectable, and that's also nice for, let's say you have a tree and you want to be able to click the tree and have it be selectable and see what kind of wood it has or whatnot. But you don't want it to be rectangle selectable because you have 2,000 trees or whatever, and it just doesn't make sense to have that. So it's nice to have something be both selectable and you can change whether it's rectangle selectable or not. And okay, so we're getting a little out of order. So receive move orders. This doesn't do anything in this asset, but if you have pathfinding for a game and your game uses that kind of thing, and like an RTS where the user tells a unit to move somewhere, this is just nice it's more of a convenience thing, so you can check if something has a selectable script, and if it's selected, and it can receive move orders and user input for moving happens, then go ahead and execute the pathfinding and move that unit. So that's mostly there just for convenience. So can be added to selection groups. We'll cover that more when we get to the selection tool. and same the sorry, I got tongue-tied. Selectable type is a string, and this is set to infantry. This is set to vehicle. That's a building. You can get as specific or vague as you want with that. And there's also selection sprites. You'll see that soon. Let's see. We'll go ahead and show that right now. So we'll unpause the game, and if you see the little green thing there or the blue thing there, that's just a sprite, and it just turns on whenever it's selected and turns off when it's unselected. So let's move on to the selection tool script. Okay, with this one, you can see the modify selection key is set to Z. Same with this selection group key set to F. That's because in the editor, Control and Shift are used for other things. For instance, Control 1 will send me to scene. So it'll work just fine in your game once you build it and it's launched from Steam or wherever. But in the editor, set it to something else when you're testing it. So modify selection allows you to add or subtract something from a current selection. So let's go ahead and click that. We're holding Z now, so now we added that, and then now we'll remove that. So we'll get to what these green lines are in a moment. I was saving that for later. So that'll add and remove. That also works with rectangle select as well. And to deselect, you just click away. Click something, or you can even click that, and clicking that will deselect that. So, alright, use selection groups. Selection groups are a common thing in strategy games. So, let's go ahead and tooltip that. So, in between 0 and 9, so on your keypad, your numpad, and then also your numbers along the top of the keyboard, both of those can be used, and that can be turned on and off right here. But let's say you have these guys selected, and let's go ahead and demonstrate that. So these guys are selected, and I'm going to go ahead and hit hold F and press 1. So now I'm going to click away. So now if I hit 1, those guys get selected. So we'll get to this thing right here, focus type, in the next section that's on focusing, and also this double press to focus, and then the focus type. So we'll get more on that in the next section. So there's also a select all of type, which uses the interaction coroutines framework that we'll get to in the last section, but it's secondary input key is always going to be whatever modify selection is. So if I change this to, let's see, K, then it just gets changed to K automatically. So let's put that back at Z, or else I'm going to make a mistake. Alright. So these settings are already pre-configured to what 99.9% of you are going to want them to be, so I wouldn't recommend changing that. Same with click select. Click select just does handle selection and also deselection. Now for rectangle select, if any of you have tried this before, you know it's pretty tricky in 3D. So this one is highly optimized, but it also includes a max number of objects to iterate through per frame whenever you finally release and you're starting to select. Or iterate through all selectables to see if they're within the rectangle. So, you know, if you got an insane amount of objects that are rectangle selectable, then we got you covered. So selection mode, you can either consider an object selected if, let's go into scene mode real quick. And its transform for this guy would be right in the center. So if this center point is within the rectangle, then it would be selected if we had object transform. And then we also have bounding box, which also includes the transform, but it includes 8 other points. It creates, the selectable script creates its own little bounding box. And so there'll be 4 points up here and then 4 points down there. And if any one of those points is within the rectangle, we'll consider it selected. The only circumstances would be, you know, if it was actually in the rectangles. If you were like super close and you did a rectangle and it would just say, and it wasn't, none of these points here, this point here, and none of those points there were in the rectangle, then it would just say it's not selectable. But you'd have to be pretty close up, and that would be a pretty rare use case. But having it this way makes it a lot more optimized and fast, and 99.9% of the time it's going to be right. So, all right, so we also, in this script, it has a draw debug lines for both, you know, proof that it works, and just, you know, just to kind of show you how it works. So, and it was also very helpful in creating the script. So, might as well keep it there just for it's nice, you'll see. So, so we'll go up close to this guy right here, and we'll skim the top, and it'll show you right there that it was in the rectangle. Now, it wasn't in these 4 grounding anchor points. None of it was, but within this triangle right here, with this anchor point, and here, and then you have this anchor point, and here, and this anchor point, and here, it was definitely within one of those triangles, or all 3. So, and that falls within from where the camera was in 3D space, right about here. We're in scene view, so it's a little tricky. Well, let's just go back to game mode. It'll be easier that way. And so from where we were when we drew the rectangle, it was that definitely within there in that shape, and you can see with this little sprite down there that it was selectable. One thing with the debug ray lines, when you can kind of get an idea of how tricky making a rectangle select tool in 3D space is, and making sure it's always accurate. You can kind of see how it's not actually a rectangle, but from that perspective of where the camera was in 3D space, it is a rectangle. So, you know, from where we were here, yeah, it was. But if you really look at where the anchor points drop, it's not actually a rectangle, so it can be a little tricky, but you know, we got you covered, so it works. And you don't have to have this on. I wouldn't have this on in your game, but it's nice to see in the editor. And another thing to see, it draws its own bounding box, so it doesn't matter really what orientation this is. It's always going to be aligned to the straight along the X and Z axis. So, all right, that pretty much covers it for the selection tool framework. All right. Okay, now we're gonna cover the section 4, the focus tool. Okay, so with this one, let's first start out by looking at the focusable script. Now, the focusable script is all you need to attach to a game object in order to make it focusable, and the game object also needs to be raycastable. So, you know, it needs a collider. And we'll get to this variable in a moment. So let's go to the focus tool, and there are 3 types of focusing, and let's just go over what focusing is first. Focusing is, let's start the game. So focusing will move the surface controller to the position of the game object, and that's pretty much it. So there are 3 different types: focus and move over time, fade focus, and instant focus. So focus and move over time will move the surface controller to the position of the game object over this many seconds. So it's set for half a second. No matter how far away it is, it'll still take half a second. So for this far away, let's click this one right here. And how you focus, how it's pre-configured with the interaction coroutine is for double clicking. Let's turn that off. And so let's double click this one, and that focused us over there. So even if we're this close, it'll still take half a second. So that's focus and move over time. Alright, so fade focus. We'll fade the screen to black with a canvas, move the surface controller to the position, and then fade back in. So I found that most of the time, like the best results usually at 0.33, so a third of a second. So that's usually, oh yeah, let's turn that off. If you remember me saying edge panning can sometimes be annoying when you're working in the editor. Let's see, so let's go back. So let's demonstrate that. So double click. So that's how that works. And you can have it disable movement controls while fading. Let's turn that off and set this to 1 second to demonstrate. So I'll be holding the D key and moving right after I double click. So let's do that. So that's how that works if that's disabled. And with that enabled, I'll be doing the same thing. And there we go. So you might want that, you might not. It just depends, but it's configurable and it's there for you to personalize your game. So let's do instant focus, and that's exactly what it sounds like. Just moves you to that position. So now, as I mentioned previously with the selection tool, with focus group or selection groups, they are also focusable. And so let's make a selection group right now. So we'll select them, that one. How about those two? And let's get some over here. And let's get the sphere over there. He's lonely. Okay, so let's assign them to 1. So they're assigned to key 1, and so you can see with their selection sprite that they're selected. Let's deselect everything, and then press 1. They're selected. There you go. Okay, so when you double press the selection group's key, so if you just press it once, it selects them. So this is me pressing once, and then if you double press it, it will focus to it, and it will find the centralmost point with all the objects in that group, and then it will find the object that's closest to it. Because I figure, let's say this is the most central point, and you're focusing to it. Usually the player isn't going to want to focus to like empty ground. They'll want to focus to at least one object in the group. So let's you can also configure it to a different type of focusing. So we can be set to fade focus here. So let's just prove that. And then there we okay. Let's set that to 0.33. All right, and so with the selection group, we can set it to focus move over time. So let's double press 1 to show that. So I guess this one was the most central one. So so it'll move you to that, and it focus moved over time with the same settings that were configured here. So even though this variable is not shown whenever fade focus is here, it's still going to use the settings for that for this. So, and you can also well, let's go over the other settings. So there's a zoom while focusing, and that will zoom the camera on the zoom animation curve to get the object as close to fully in the extents as possible. And so it will either zoom in or out. So let's go ahead and demonstrate that, and let's set that to it works with fade focus for sure. It works with all of them. So, well, I don't believe it's configured with instant focus. Yeah, it doesn't do instant focus because it doesn't work well with instant focusing. So with fade focusing it works, and with move over time it works. So now we'll get to the setting I was describing earlier, this one. So let's show the, while it's pretty amazing and it took some complicated math to get it to work no matter what the object is. So, you know, it just, you know, checks out the render, and it checks out the camera and the focusing lens and the field of view and all that stuff, and it does some complicated math, and it figures out what the best time on the normalized time is, and if it needs to zoom in or out. So you don't actually need to configure it, but the little anomaly, which is best shown if we don't have that height adjustment component on there, is shown if you double click it, and oh, we have that on. Let's turn that off. Okay, so this is the anomaly with it off. So if we double click, we zoomed in, but if we keep double clicking, we're gonna kind of zoom in and out. So it's not that bad of a problem, but if you really want that extra layer of polish, you know, we got you covered. So let's go ahead and configure this, and this will give you the time in normalized time you want for your zoom animation. So like if you have, you know, 50 seconds long of a zoom animation curve, which would be kind of crazy, but hey, if you do, in setting this to 0.51 in this case would be, you know, 51% of the way through, so pretty much about halfway through. So it's kind of hard to figure out, you know, or just eyeball, well, oh, what's the best time? So that's why we have this little option right here. So let's go back in the game, and let's make sure we're in the middle of it. Oh, I left that on again, didn't I? Yep. Whoops. Okay, so again, now we're in the center. So let's say this is a pretty good time. So let's scroll down. So 0.147, that looks pretty good. So let's turn that on and set it to 0.147. So, and it doesn't have to be exact, but now instead of trying to figure out the best time, it will just go to that time in the normalized time in the zoom animation curve. And it's a little more performant friendly because, you know, no calculations have to be made to find out what the best, you know, normalized time in the zoom animation curve is going to be best, but you know, those calculations are pretty small. It's negligible at best. So let's show that now has the preferred time. So now if I keep double clicking, it'll, instead of going back and forth, it'll just stay there. It's kind of bobbing up and down, but that's because, you know, there's terrain underneath here that it's trying to height adjust with, because I didn't bother, you know, making sure it was perfectly flat underneath. But all right, so that's zoom with focusing, and now let's show the selection groups. I don't know if we already did that. I can't remember. But I think we did. But they also can do zoom while focusing. So you can, I think we still have them. Yeah, we still have them set up. So then we definitely did it. Okay, good. So zoom while focusing with the selection groups. With that turned on, it'll zoom to this guy. It's probably not going to be desirable most of the time, but it might be. You know, I'm not going to be presumptuous about how you're being creative with your game. So, but it's there if you want it. So let's go ahead and turn that back off. So let's also turn that off so it stops printing in the debug log. That does tend to hurt your frame rate. I don't know why debug log printing hurts it so bad, but it does. So let's also turn that off. So now let's go over follow game object after focusing, and that is the sole purpose for this guy over here. That is his reason for living, to demonstrate this feature. So it will follow the game object after focusing, and right now we have it set to focus move over time, and I don't believe it works with instant focus, just focus move over time and fade focus. So let's go ahead and do that. So that will continue to follow it unless you you do movement, left, right, front, back. You can still rotate around it, And you can also look at the code for that and, use it for your game however you wish to do. So this can also be something like you would use for like a RPG like Diablo when you want to follow somebody around, or Divinity Original Sins or something like that. So this camera does work for more than just, city building or RTS or other, those kind of strategy games. So we'll go ahead and just move, and we'll move off of it. And I do believe it, actually I think it might work with instant focus, but he's going fast. Let me see if I can get him. There we go. So that's fade focus and instant focus. Oh, it's hard to get sometimes. Oh, it does work with instant focus. I forgot. My bad. Okay. So that is pretty much all the settings, I think. So that covers it for fade focus, and we also covered the selection group focusing there. So, all right, that's it. All right, now we're at section 5. We're going to cover the interaction coroutine framework and just some odds and ends, okay? So the interaction coroutine framework is really nifty because it just some commonly used things, or commonly sought after input, or however you want to put it, code that you would have to type for user interaction input, like the keys, the key press types. If there's multiple keys, if they're both pressed and whatnot. If you want to wait for a double click, which is half a second. Do a raycast. Require the same game object to be hit with both raycasts on double click. So those were pretty much the core ones that I boiled it down to. And instead of having to rewrite this code for all the things that I would use it, it's just here and built in with a modular way of doing it. And there is a template here made, and it already has all the stuff that it needs to function. You can configure it however you want. You attach it to a game object, and you can put your related fields for what you want to do here, and then there's just some helper stuff down here, like if you wanted the mouse screen position, the raycast hit position, the game object that was hit, just some stuff to help save time. And then you have your actual coroutine code goes here. And this kind of helps ensure that, only one instance of it is running at a time, if that's what you want. If you don't want that, you can get rid of this, but most of the time you probably want that. And then, just some stuff in here to also work in tandem with the CameraTron script and check its current state. If it's disabled, disable this for user input and whatnot. So it's really nifty. I used it a lot in this asset, and it saved a lot of time and a lot of headaches and a lot of typing, and it's there for you to use for other things if you want. Another thing to cover is if you can see that most, if not all, I believe all. Well, no, I don't think that the selectables. No, yeah, the selectables does have it, but some things like the height adjust collider doesn't have it. Have the custom UI that was made for custom inspector UI that was made for this asset. So as you can see in a lot of them, if not all of them, they have an additional variables thing. So this I have here, just for example, position at last bounding box check. If you wanted to put additional variables, like if you wanted to extend the code within the script, and you added a variable, this is where it would go. Just because everything else is already pre-configured for the UI, just so it looks nice and it's easy to use. And Also, if you don't want to use the custom padding that is made with this, I prefer this over the default, the way the labels and the text boxes and whatnot go. I just like to be able to see the actual name of the variable I'm looking at without having to expand it out really far, because you're going to get some pretty long variable names in this asset, just because I did my best to make sure everything sounded as intuitive as possible so you could read its name and pretty much know what it did. I figured that would save a lot more time, so that's how that works. But if that's not what you want, let's see, you can go to this script right here, the CameraTron9000 UI state. Oh wait, nope, that's the wrong one. Disregard that. This is it right here. So you can go to this script right here and go to this field right here, use custom padded. It's right at the top. Let's go ahead and drop that down and just set that to false. Save it, let it load. Sometimes you have to click away to another script and then click back, and now it'll be using the normal one. So if you don't like the way this one does it, then that's how you set it back. I try to make it super easy, but I hope you prefer the way I set it up. It took some effort. Alright, so that's one thing to cover. This is an important thing to cover, cam shared variables. For all the objects, if the camera surface controller wants to reference the camera object, it does so through cam shared variables. So it's just a way to make it way easier, so you don't have to drag every object onto the other script. You just have to check cam shared variables and ask it what's the camera object, and then grab its camera zoom and swivel script, and then you're good to go. It's just much easier. And then you also have various states, and this is related to the UI as well. So we'll cover that real quick. So right here, this makes it so much easier to configure all the movements. Like, what do you want to disable when the mouse is over this particular button or canvas or just UI element? Do you want it to, disable everything? Do you want it to just disable edge panning? Do you want to disable edge panning except for hard edge panning? So allow that. Disable mouse panning when it's over. Disable movement when it's over, including, that includes keyboard movement or mouse panning movement. And so disable rotation control, disable zooming, disable swivel mode, force swivel mode to rotate back, and disable selecting. So try to make it super easy. Is if you can see the note up here, so if you have the on key / button press set to none, so that'll happen just when the mouse is over. You can set it to get key down, get key up, and key includes, mouse or keyboard keys. So you can have these state controls only disable whenever, let's say the mouse is over, and then you left click, So and you can actually put multiple ones of these on and configure them differently for get key down, get key up, and none. So it's very versatile. And again, it just like the other things, it has the additional variables. If you're extending, that's where it will show up. I think that's pretty much it. I'll be making a forum posting, and I'll put the link in the store page. So if you have other questions, you can go ahead and ask there. I'll get back to you pretty quickly with that, probably the same day. And if you have tech support problems, send an email. Send an email to strategytron@gmail.com. That will also be on the store page and in the documentation, which can be found here in the main folder right here. So, alright, that pretty much concludes the feature overview for CameraTron9000. Thank you for sitting through the entire thing if you made it this far. Alright, bye.